This episode of the Party Loaded podcast is proudly sponsored by Audible.com. Check out their awesome catalogue of audiobooks with over 180,000 titles to choose from. And be sure to grab a free audiobook on us and support the show by visiting audibletrial.com/endgame.
Let's party.
So 50 people, I think, would be enough to run interference. You could give sledgehammers, a mix of Molotovs, and det cord to maybe another 50, 60, and that leaves probably just under 700 to, use whatever device of their choice they prefer to bring that mansion down to fucking rubble. So what do you think about that?
Honestly, why stop at 800 people? You can get way more than that. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people that could jump in.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm pretty sure if you had the right equipment, you could make this a one-man job, fly right under the radar. I think that might be a safe bet.
That's true.
But then, what about the other people that are invested and want to play a role? I think it's important to get people involved. You gotta give everybody a piece of the action. It's kind of like it's a community thing more than anything. So
I guess I'm just a selfish saboteur. That's just the way I roll.
Yep, that's fair.
That's fair.
All right, anyway, this is Party Loaded. This is, of course, your one-stop shop for everything great in the world of video games. Welcome. This is the show for Wednesday evening, the 13th of February, 2019. And my name's Luke Retallick. Joining us tonight, as per usual, we've got Game Dad Matt Diet, we've got Christian Paulson Brown, and we've got Adrian Cheer. Welcome, everybody. How's the game going?
Hello.
Yo. What a week. Yo.
What a week.
Man, this whole beginning of the year being quiet thing is bullshit, I think. I think we're disproving this with every episode we're doing at this point in the year. So, man.
That's actually a good point. I think it was only last week that we were like, hey, it was actually kind of a quiet week last week. But then this week, it's ridiculous again.
Well, I mean, it used to be a thing where I think a couple of really savvy publishers in particular, when it comes to game releases, cottoned on to the fact that people are really chomping at the bit for more content immediately after Christmas. And Capcom in particular, with launching Resident Evil 7 a couple of years ago, seemed to be the one that stepped into the void, and then they had the Monster Hunter thing last year too. But now every man and his dog wants to get in on the action, and on top of that, the news cycle is just cranked up to 11 as well. So yeah, I don't know if that is comes together as a package or whether, it's mostly the game releases and the news is a weird happenstance, but this is the world we're living in now, so
yeah.
Yep. But it's not all good. Anyway, we'll get onto that a little bit later. In terms of games played this week, let's kick off with a little bit of a follow-up from last week's discussion. How has Apex Legends been treating all of you? Has anyone been jumping in and playing a bit of that this week, besides myself?
Yeah, I've jumped in and had a couple of rounds, but I think echoing kind of what Christian said last week, I find it a little unfulfilling without people that I know. I find jumping in with randoms just kind of doesn't really provide the kind of buzz that I really get when I'm playing with friends instead. And I think it's just because you're kind of forced to be cooperative. So it's always going to be better if you're being cooperative with people that you know and trust. So that's always nice. But I mean, everyone's sort of everyone is lauding the pinging system and the communication system. So, and that is good. So that goes a long way to making things somewhat more bearable.
Yeah, I'm actually curious, on that comment, based on the fact that you would obviously play other games with randoms on occasion, just due to the way that they're put together, other Battle Royales would be a good example. Do you think that Apex feels better because of the tools that they've built into it to account for that, or I don't know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I say, I've played quite a lot of Fortnite, and I'm pretty sure, unless you turn it off, when you play Fortnite, you select either solo or group mode. If you're playing the group mode of Fortnite, you are thrown into a group of 4, but there is absolutely no way to communicate. So people just end up ducking or jumping up and down or moving, communicating like we used to in a first-person shooter online, when you're trying to communicate look at the sky if you're trying to say yes or no, or hey, look at that guy, he's wobbling his gun all over the place, he must be trying to tell us something. What is it, girl? Did Billy fall down the well? It's a bit like that in Fortnite, So, I mean, any kind of sophisticated communication system that doesn't involve voice is always better. And let's face it, no one really likes talking to other people anyway. So
no,
that's that makes it enjoyable for that reason alone, I think.
Fucking madness. Why would
I'm
anyone
actually
do that?
going to... Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
go on, Adrian.
Oh, no, all I was going to say is that, I mean, it's already been said, by a million people online, but that pinging ability where you can just ping items and, ping locations, and the game does all the hard work on the back end and just, says, your character goes, oh, medkit over here, or shotgun over here. That's just so comfortable and, nice and easy, and takes all the stress out of, worrying about communication. So it's certainly really good in that sense. And I can't think of anywhere else where this kind of system, or where I've encountered it anyway. Maybe it does exist in other games, but yeah.
I genuinely do think that ping system is a revelation in the same way that Halo on Xbox was a revelation as to how people made first-person shooters on consoles.
Yeah, sure.
I think that we'll start seeing a lot of games using a ping system like that when they're multiplayer focused. The moment I saw it, my thought was Destiny. And in Destiny, when you're playing with a bunch of randoms, you would always communicate with them using your emotes and such. And you have a wide variety of emotes. So
How
you've got
good
a lot of
in
potential
raids
there.
would it be, man? With the technical stuff you've got to do. Yeah.
Yeah, like the ability to ping stuff, or to be able to say, so heavy ammo's come in. So you ping the heavy ammo, I'm not picking it up, I'm good, somebody come and get this, right? It's basically indicating your team members to come and get that thing. That ping system is applicable to so many different games than just the Fortnite-esque battle royale genre, that I totally see it getting used elsewhere a lot. I see it being used a lot. And the way they tested it was so clever. Like the story about how they did that, they all had randomly generated names and voice communications were off. So they all just, whenever they were playing, it was just basically among a group of randoms. And so until that they could communicate with each other and not know who they were talking to and be able to get stuff across, that was the point at which that they were satisfied with the ping system.
It's almost like a corporate team building trust exercise setup, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. No, nice. I agree. And I love the fact that you can acknowledge the communication as well rather than just giving it. I think that's, the two-way nature of it is really, really awesome. Yeah. Man, fucking good job, hey. I think I've come to the realization about a couple of things this week with Apex in particular. Number one is that I think that without a doubt, it is the best Battle Royale game that's out right now. Fortnite may still have the bigger audience, but as a technical accomplishment, the way that the launch was handled and the actual sort of gameplay and systems available in game, I don't think it can be topped right now. It's got pretty much everything that you want. But I came to the second conclusion, and that's that Battle Royale games are still not my jam. So-
I feel the same. It's my favorite Battle Royale game by a long margin, but it's still not really my thing. I've played once since we recorded last. That was with you guys, Adrian and Matt, and that was fun. But
It's the sort of game I will pick up with friends every now and then, but I have no desire to go and pick it up and play by myself for sure.
And it's not a knock on the game at all. It's just the genre. It's we're all very heavy story players, I think, for the most part, and that speaks to us maybe not jumping on a battle royale as our first choice, no matter how good it is. So,
what are you saying, Adrian?
I'm just not impressed by it, actually. To be honest, I think it's a hype. I think it's just hype. I think the whole thing is hype, and I think, I'm not I mean, it's kind of meta because, if something's popular, it's popular. You can't say that it's not because, numbers make it popular. But there's something about it that I just don't like, and maybe it's just personal taste. I just find it kind of bland, and I don't something about it being produced because it's what's popular makes me not like it very much. But
I can get that.
But that's more of a personal thing, and that's a personality thing, not indicative of whether it's good or not.
Yeah.
That's just
like a
indicative of the fact. Sorry?
That sounds like a personality thing, because for me, the aesthetic and the theme of it is the most appealing thing. I find
fair enough.
I find that the graphics and the setting and the weapons and everything, and the fact that it's locked into first person, that's what excites me the most it. Fortnite, I can't stand the Fortnite art style, and PUBG is just a bland mess.
For me, it goes beyond that, I think. There's just something about it coming out at this time, and the fact that it is a battle royale it makes me uninspired. I have a feeling if it was a game that was tailored to an art style that I really like, I think I would still just be not interested in it right now. There's something about it just kind of turns me off.
I mean, for me, like the aesthetics, I'm not a huge fan of, but I love it mechanically. Like the ping system and everything, the sliding is like Super Destiny-esque, only your character has like roller skates on their ass. So you just slide all over the place, and it's fucking great. Like, I love it. It's really, really clever. It's super unique. But I totally agree with Adrian. Like, part of the reason why I don't think I super click with it is because it's the in thing. And these damn kids with their Fortnites and everything, like, I just don't get it. I don't quite get it.
Yeah, we don't feel compelled to be part of the zeitgeist. We want to, like it if it's a great thing, not because it's popular. No.
Yes, I mean, it is hypocritical of me because I did play a lot of Fortnite and I really enjoyed that. And that's a battle royale, the battle royale, up until Apex, I guess, was released. And I'm glad that there's variety, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm glad that there's something else that people can play. I just think, I just would have liked Titanfall 3 instead of a battle royale. But that's a sentiment echoed everywhere. And, I'm sure there's, it's greedy to say, no, you need to give me what I think I should want. Not what you feel like making. I understand that that's a silly thing to say as a consumer. Make the thing I want. Oh, you didn't give it to me. I hate it. Thanks, honestly, I hate it.
If anything, I think the success of Apex Legends may lead to a better or a sooner Titanfall 3 as a result. Yeah. I would not be surprised.
I guess what I'm trying to say, and this sort of might be more accurate, is that I think people love it just because it's a battle royale. I think people are like, it's so good, but I think it's just because it's the next best battle royale. So, and because of the weight of numbers of battle royale fans, it's just heralded as amazing, but only just through sheer weight of numbers and people that are looking for the next big thing. So it's popular because it's the next big thing, regardless of what it kind of is. That's what I'm trying to kind of articulate, and that's the vibe I get off of it.
Yeah. Cool. I don't agree, but I can see where you're coming from. I definitely think there's a lot of people who have a valid sort of feeling about battle royales in general because of that. So, yeah, it makes sense to me. Yeah. All right, well, I mean, there's no doubt that we're going to be hearing a bunch about this game for the rest of the year, so we certainly don't need to go on now because there'll be plenty of opportunity later. Yeah, what have you guys been doing in Assassin's Creed world? How's that going?
I've been having a ton of fun, but I'm interested in hearing how Christian's doing because you posted up in our chat about that earlier this week. So I'm keen to hear his opinions.
I love it. I mean, I'm on record with how much I loved Origins, and Odyssey it's an extension of Origins in a lot of ways. It does some things better and some things I don't like as much. Like one thing for me is the actual character and the core sort of plot doesn't actually interest me as much as Origins did. I feel like it doesn't have as deep of an emotional hook in me that Origins did. Like, I'm playing Cassandra and I get why she's doing what she's doing, and it's like justified, but it's not as compelling for me. But I really like the other things. Like, I love that it has the dialogue system where you're making choices. That's brilliant. The actual combat abilities are much more exciting. Like, you're doing AoEs and teleporting, and it's just a much more dynamic combat system than Origins. I like that they've taken out some of the grinding that was in Origins. You had to it was kind of like Far Cry, where you had certain items that you needed to farm, like animals, to upgrade your quiver and stuff like that. They took that out, or they've simplified it.
Yeah.
But so for me, it's gameplay system wise, it's much better, but the setting and the characters aren't as compelling for me yet as Origins. But I'm thoroughly enjoying it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, because for me, the setting and characters are what has absolutely hooked me in. Mm-hmm. I was talking with everyone earlier in the week about the fact that Socrates, whenever he turns up, is absolutely my favorite character in the game so far, because he's just every time he turns up, he's just constantly asking questions. I don't think there's very many sentences that he actually speaks that aren't in the form of a question to the player character about their motivations and about why they're doing something.
That's the Socratic method.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you mean Socrates?
No, because they say Socrates in the game.
Socrates. Boo.
Yeah. There's a lot of that.
There's a lot of that.
Don't worry, Adrian, I felt the same thing, so go on.
No, trust me, I'm sitting here having to say that, not actually Socrates, because that's how I would say it.
Yeah.
I think random 30-year-old occasional podcaster in Perth knows more than an entire game studio. Thank you very much.
But yeah, whenever he's talking to the character, it's just so funny because you end up interacting with him a lot, and the player character just gets so tired of his bullshit, and it just ends in some really, really funny moments that are made that much funnier when they happen in context, because you've been dealing with all these conversations with him up to that point. That there's a point at which he asks something of the player after you've gone and done something potentially horrible. If you've decided to do that, it may be horrible. It may be the right decision, but of course he questions it, and just the response from the player character just being a very flat and very quick, almost cutting him off. Yes, is just the most hilarious thing that I was sitting there with tears in my eyes because I was laughing so much. The game is really fucking good. Like, it's so well written. Shockingly well written. Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I'm back into Assassin's Creed. So
I did want to mention one gameplay system that I don't actually like as much as Origins, and that's the severity of the level scaling. So I feel like in Odyssey, the difference between each level as far as like enemy strength and your damage goes is too much. So I find myself, if I'm 2 levels lower than an enemy, they turn into a massive bullet sponge, and I just feel like there's a little bit of tweaking that could have been done there. Whereas in Origins, even if you're a couple of levels behind, it doesn't kind of pad out the difficulty scale as much. So that's just a small thing, but it's like when you actually like assassinate somebody, like press triangle and stealth kill them, like in Origins, even if they're a high level, you'll probably one-shot them anyway because you're an assassin and you've got the drop on them. Whereas this, if you try and assassinate somebody, that you might just do like a third of their health, and it doesn't quite make me feel like assassin-y enough.
I will say, like, my character build that I'm playing at the moment, I have built out as an assassin. And once you have a set of armor that boosts your assassin damage, because it's all percentage, and you have all the abilities that increase your assassin damage and such as well, I'm able to sneak up on mercenaries my level and one hit kill them if I get the jump on them.
Oh, that's cool.
So it does improve, and so does the level scaling as well. Like, there comes a point, I think my character's around level 32 or something at the moment, and
what's
I'm
the
killing.
cap, Matt? How far does it go?
I think it goes up to 50.
Okay.
Like, I've seen stuff that goes up to 50. But I've been killing people that are several levels higher than me, and it's a longer fight. Like, the bullet spongy thing is there, but they become less threatening. It actually feels really good because it's like, hey, this is an actually challenging fight right here. So yeah, it's pretty good.
It might just be a personal thing, but like even the way that it's a default setting that as you level up, the level of the enemies scales with you in quests. Yeah. So like your main mission quests will always match your level, and I don't like that. I like the feeling of being able to get a couple of levels ahead of the quest, so that it's a little easier for me to do. But you can't do that.
There are actually, if you look on your map, some areas are actually dedicated levels.
Yeah.
But it is interesting.
Yeah, but that's not for them. That's not for the main quests.
One plus side though might be if you spend time doing a bunch of side content, you're not going to overlevel the main game if that's true. So,
yeah, but I want to do that. I want to overlevel the main game if I want to.
Yeah,
fair enough.
Does that mean you never get to live like a bit of a power fantasy? Are you always sort of struggling?
Only for quests. So you can because the zones are, it's like a MMO. The zones are level based. So there's like a level 15 to 25 area, 35 to 50 area. So you can go back to an earlier area and like feel like a god. But just for the quests that it scales.
I will say though, like, you can totally feel like a god in the part of the game I'm currently in. On more than one occasion, I've gone and pissed off an entire fortress worth of enemies just to see if I could survive. And I barely scraped through, and it was the most satisfying thing in the world, just to have this pile of corpses around my lone standing character. Like, that shit can happen. It's just it's interesting how the character scales in power. Because I don't think have you gotten to the point yet, Christian, that you've actually started getting spear upgrades?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Because those add a lot to your ability to fight. It's kind of nuts.
I think like I'm doing that too. Like I can take out a stronghold just like balls out, but it doesn't feel as satisfying as Origins in some way.
And I haven't played Origins, so I can't.
When
make
I have my balls out, it always feels satisfying.
Christian, I think you're just missing a crucial upgrade called Get Good, basically. No, but look, honestly, that level scaling system, well, I can understand why you might not like it because it doesn't give you that quick run through if you put the time in to do the side stuff. But for me, that's the sort of thing I like in games because I like to feel, particularly with the main storyline, I like to feel challenged. I don't like to feel like I've got a cheap win because I've spent too much time in other areas of the game because then that forces me to not explore side content and sort of only mainline the game, which I think is a bad play experience if it forces you in one direction over another. So
I think it comes down to like the gameplay loop that I'm used to from Origins, where I would do a main story quest, then do side quests until I'm like 1 or 2 levels higher, then do a main story quest, then do side quests, main story quests, and I'd alternate back and forth. And so I had like a system, but with Odyssey, you can't do that, like because you could just
so you're after the slight advantage, not the massive power level.
No. And it was just a way of it was a way of breaking up my time. That I was used to.
Yeah, almost like a reward system.
Yeah, I'm with you, Christian. Like, although not having played Assassin's Creed games, I do like to do that in other games as well. I like to be higher than the mission levels.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I like to sort of go out and get good gear. And I don't know, it feels like if you're doing a side quest where you're going to earn some sort of cool equipment or levels or skills, and then using them in the story missions as like a reward for going to the extra effort.
Yeah. And as Matt says, you can get good gear from side quests, and it does make you more powerful, even though the content is the same level as you, but it's just not to the same degree.
Yeah, fair enough.
There's a lot of actually really good rewards for exploring, like not even side quest stuff, but like there's a building over there, I'm going to go in there, and it turns out that this is actually a special historical location that has a chest in it that drops a gold item.
Wow,
and
it's like the opposite of Fallout 76.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's actually genuinely rewarding for going out and exploring and completing everything on the map. I know I'd said I wasn't going to be a completionist in this game, but it's so hard not to do because the game's just fun to be a completionist at.
Yeah.
So
I did the completionist for Origins. I explored every area.
It sounds a bit like Horizon Zero Dawn in that respect. Like I think I might actually be compelled to do that as well when I play it. So
yeah.
Nice. Well,
What about you, Luke? What have you been up to?
A couple of quick things I played this week. So I'll start with Life is Strange 2. I got to play episode 2, which has now come out for that game. So for anyone who is unaware, the first episode of that game sort of kicks off without spoiling with a fairly tragic event that kind of propels the two main characters onto their journey as it is. The two main characters being some young sort of half Hispanic boys that are, they end up having life on the road and having to sort of navigate their way out into the wide sort of peril-filled world and discovering themselves as they go. And, one of those journeys of discovery revolves around one of the kids basically discovering a ability of some sort, similar to what happens in the first Life is Strange game. Now, the second episode is much more in line with exploring that kind of ability, and it finally links in with the content for that single one-shot prequel called The Amazing Adventures of Captain Spirit, if I've got the name right. So it actually does link in episode 2. In fact, when you load episode 2, it actually tells you if you have played The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit on the same computer that it's importing your save game file. So you can see that some of the stuff you did in that actually matters when it comes to this, which is cool. I like that. So, but yeah, like man, episode 2 again, it just starts off with something really, really sad, like just to jar you out of any sort of sense of comfort you have. Not quite to the same level as the first one, but yeah, man, it's just like, if the tragedy in the first episode is kind of like, holy shit, the one in the second ep is like, oh man, sort of thing. So yeah, but without going into any more detail, it's playing out really nicely at the moment. I'm quite enjoying it. It's a great story, and I think it's going to be very, very strong. Several episode arcs. So the only problem is how long it takes between each one. God damn it. So I think a lot of people will probably make the choice to wait until everything's out and then play it through that way. But I love it so much that I can't wait. So, but the other thing that I spent more time playing over last weekend, of course, was the Division 2, or so I should say, Tom Clancy's The Division 2 open, not open beta, closed beta. So demo weekend was you needed to get hold of a demo key or have pre-ordered the game. So because I didn't want to leave it to chance, I bit the bullet and pre-ordered because I knew I was going to get it anyway. Got the demo access and jumped in. and I was very, very satisfied with my time in the Division 2. So my expectations going in was I wanted more of the same of the Division 1 with some quality of life improvements and some extra stuff, and that is exactly what I got. So I'm pretty damn happy. So anyone who didn't enjoy Division 1 and didn't sort of enjoy the core gameplay loop of that game and how the systems and stuff worked, you'll probably have the same complaints in the Division 2. I, on the other hand, love the shit out of that, so it's perfect for me. So one thing that I will say I think is a massive step up from Division 1 is the setting in general. Like, you know, the snow-covered sort of heavy urban environment of the first division compared to Washington, D.C., where like you're in the summer and there's a lot of different weather effects and parts of the terrain have been overgrown by nature. And there's just much bigger, wide open areas amongst all of the heavy sort of urban bits as well. I just think that the whole setting is much better for a game like this, which gives you variety when it comes to the different missions that you're doing. Like when you first start off, the opening stretch of the game is literally navigating your way through a dilapidated sort of Christmas village that has kind of been abandoned at some time in the previous year on your way up to the White House. And you basically have to deal with a bunch of dudes that are besieging the White House to get in and establish your base of operations there. That opening mission, because of that sort of, you know, weird kind of new terrain that you haven't experienced in the Division before, is fucking cool. Like, I really liked it. So, yeah. And the rest of the game's just gorgeous.
I am looking forward to seeing if it has a really good end game, because if it has a good end game, I am totally going to jump in, because I loved the Division 1 until I got to the end game and I realized that it sucked.
I've done a lot of reading on what they've planned for the end game, and what I've read so far is filling me with a lot of confidence. I think they've really got a good direction for it. One of the key things, I didn't actually play as far in the demo as this. I mean, I should say up front as well, this demo was freaking massive, like absolutely huge. It's given me a lot of promise for how much content's going to be in the game. So in the end game, apparently there's an additional faction that kind of drops in called the Black Tusk, which are kind of like a very elite paramilitary force that have, you know, higher level weapons and gear and that kind of thing. And I almost picture them as like an elite Hydra kind of squad, you know, Hydra from the Marvel sort of universe. And apparently what happens with them is not only do they become sort of endgame protagonists in some of the set endgame areas like the Dark Zone, of which there are 3 Dark Zones in this game, not just one, because they've all got a different flavor. But apparently they actually start appearing in other areas of the map as well as you sort of get into their endgame, including them sort of taking the place of some of the standard antagonists in some of the basic missions that you might want to run on repeat. So if you go back and play some of those missions again on like higher levels of difficulty, in addition to the higher difficulty, you'll also have these fucks turning up and really ruining your day. So I think that that's kind of cool. They'll offer like better sort of weapon drops and gear, and you know the whole thing's still a Diablo style sort of, you know, gear grind, and you know you have to be into that to enjoy it. But the way that is going to kind of work, I think, sounds really cool. I'm into that. So
did you say they're called Black Tusk?
Black Tusk, yeah. So is that taken from somewhere else too?
That's the studio that made Gears of War 4.
Ah, yeah, of course. Interesting.
Like just coincidence, but
I don't think there's any relation to that. But yeah, that's cool to know. Yeah. So yeah, Division 2, looking real good. I'm super looking forward to it. And there's I'll just jump the gun and insert one of the news items as well. Division 2 is getting an open beta, so that's coming up real soon. If you want to actually jump in and play the open beta, March 1 through to March 4, it's going to be open to the public. So, and of course, anyone who's done the private beta might want to keep their files installed on their PC so that you don't have to re-download the whole thing. So
I might jump in.
Yeah, it's cool. You'll get to play like a whole bunch of campaign missions, the first Dark Zone area, stacks and stacks of stuff. So yeah, you should definitely check that out. Adrian, you've got something else on the list. Tell us a bit about Crashlands. What's the story there?
Yeah, so Crashlands, I remember seeing it on Steam a while ago, and it comes up in my referred, like games that it tries to refer you to, based on what you've already played. And I took a little work trip to Geraldton during the week, last week, and I was trying to figure out something I could do on my phone, and I saw that Crashlands is available on Android. So I just thought I'd mention that I've been playing a bit of that and really enjoying it. I don't know what the genre of game is called because it's the first one I've played, but it looks like Don't Starve, where you're sort of in a top-down, almost isometric view, and you're like a lone character, and you have to go around and gather resources and build a shelter and fight off monsters and craft stuff.
Sounds like a survival sim.
Yeah, except this one has like no survival in it. It's just like crafting. So mostly like it's mostly like you go out, you kill monsters, you gather parts, you go back to your house, make new armor, and rinse and repeat. That's basically all it is. But what surprised me is the map in the game, because you can access the map straight away, and the whole map is just a black phone screen except for the tiny dot where you're on the map. And like looking at the map, or the last time I looked at it, I have been playing for days and hours and hours and hours. But when you zoom out, it's like one of those infographics where it's like the solar system zooming out on itself, and it's so huge. And I have really high hopes that whole area is explorable, because it means this game's going to have really long legs, which is what I really like in a mobile game. I always tend to download a mobile game and burn through them quite quickly, so I'm quite keen to see where it takes me. But I just thought I'd mention it, and I'm enjoying it, and if any listeners out there are enjoying it too, then I'm there with you.
Yeah. Is it procedurally generated terrain, do you think, or is it set?
I don't think so, because it does have like a story to it. Like, it's just like a little cute story about like a space delivery man crash landing on a planet and having to survive. There's a villain and there's NPCs that you talk to and they give you quests. So it does have a little bit, but I mean the quests are always just go over there and kill that thing and bring me back 5 of its hearts or something like that. So,
the bear bug gathering.
Yeah, there's a lot of. I mean, I guess one kind of aesthetic of it. One sort of element of it that's interesting is the art style is kind of weird and gross. It's like I can't quite explain it. It's kind of like tacky tattoo art in a way. It's interesting. You'd have to Google it to really get a better idea. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention it, and I'm having fun. Apart from that, just playing a lot of Warframe as well. So, but that goes without saying. So.
Yeah, actually, I will insert as well. I just had a super heavy week on Warframe, and I think that we're going to have to talk about a way to do like an entire episode or something dedicated to Warframe, so we can talk about that game proper, because we're just not covering what we need to cover at the moment.
A spoiler cast.
Yeah, something like that.
Cast.
We almost need to do like a Warframe dedicated show, whether we do that as an episode topic or something separate. I don't know. We'll talk about that offline. So could be an opportunity.
We'll invite Matt.
Yeah.
I will happily come along and just sit in the crowd and boo.
It'll be an intervention cast.
Intervention cast.
A recruitment
I'm
cast.
happy to talk about it.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
But it kind of like an outsider's perspective kind of fascinating.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yep. Sounds good.
Yeah, it's like diseases are fascinating, you know.
Yeah. I don't want one.
Well, it's about as infectious as that. Anyway, so all right, well, let's kick it over to Matt for our gaming news for this week.
Now it's time to hear some gaming news. Time for some gaming news.
Yeah, so in the news today, fuck Activision Blizzard. Over to you, Luke.
Wow. Yeah. I mean,
Take that, corporate entity.
yeah. What else
Now
do we
they'll
say?
listen.
Holy shit. Just, oh my God.
Yeah, so basically they had like an earnings call thing today where they announced that they had recorded record earnings this past year, and then within like 5 minutes of that announcement, they also announced that they were cutting 8% of their staff across Activision Blizzard, which ended up being around 800 people that have just been let go. I've seen my Twitter blowing up with all these different people basically talking about the fact that they've been ditched by Activision Blizzard now. Primarily for the Blizzard side, it's in like support staff and the esports end. And when I say support staff, that basically means like your WoW GMs and such have been slashed through, which is going to make it kind of shitty playing World of Warcraft at the moment. Because like GM response times was already really, really slow. So now you're in for like a 6-hour wait before you get a response for anything, possibly longer. It just, a lot of people are grabbing on to the fact that the financial call really started off with them saying that, you know, it was their highest earning year. And then that they you're going to cut all these staff members. It's important to note that like stocks of a couple of big publishers are on a downward trend at the moment. But at the same time, like, what the fuck? Like, how can you say that you've had a really highly earning year and then follow it up by also we're going to kick off a whole bunch of our staff? It just makes no sense.
I'm sure it makes business sense.
Yeah.
It makes business sense because, like, they're making money, right? And they want to make more money. and they can do that by cutting their staff. But clearly, the
Or,
CEO and the CFO
Cutting
and everything.
CEO salary.
That would be great. That would be really fucking great. Like the fact that they brought on the CFO and he got their $15 million like sign-on bonus. And then, you have all of these staff that are told, by the way, we're going to be dropping people at some stage. The way they've handled this is also really shitty. Like, nobody's had any time to prepare. It was basically in the call, they said they were going to be firing 800 staff, and then the same day, they were actually firing staff. But it's basically been this thing looming over developers' heads for the last year as to who would be getting the boot, basically. And it sounds like a whole bunch of their internal initiatives inside of Blizzard have been shut down. So they started that game jamming initiative thing.
It was like an incubator, like a new ideas incubator. I think a lot of the mobile stuff was being developed in there as well, or at least the early sort of thought process around it. So yeah, I don't know.
I will guarantee their mobile stuff is still going.
Yeah.
Like their mobile stuff will keep on going because Activision Blizzard, like in their call, had basically stated that it was one of the core areas they expect to make money from.
Yeah. When J. Allen Brack came back to Blizzard, actually, before he took over from Mike Morhaime, he was in charge of that incubator project area. So now that he's moved out of that, that's obviously changed shape and size and been repurposed to whatever is being done in the background now. So we'll probably never know.
There's a couple of Blizzard employees I've seen retweeted that were basically expressing sadness that a project that they were working on, they have been told, is no longer able to keep going forward because they want to focus on all their core IP. It's basically just Warcraft and Overwatch and everything. They're moving staff back onto those projects to increase team sizes, which is... If you're a dumb CEO, for example, and you think that, hey, if we just put more people on those projects that are really popular, we'll get better results, that's not how it works.
No. And
it could potentially backfire in a big way, and we could see more people being let go of in a few years, a few months' time, simply because does the Warcraft team need another 100 people, right? Or were those people better spent elsewhere working on other small projects that were expanding their IP? But really, what this whole thing is that they're contracting down from a wider scope of let's try and make a whole bunch of new cool stuff to let's just make what people want and what's going to sell, and we can guarantee it's going to sell. So
yeah. Just to put it in perspective, I saw some numbers today that really kind of drove it home for me in terms of comparing to the Australian games industry. So if 800 people were laid off, the size of the workforce in the Australian games industry at last count I saw was around the just over 1,000 mark of people sort of working in professional game roles. Now,
full-time,
800 versus 1,000, given that they laid off almost the equivalent of the entire size of the Oz games industry full-time, that's fucking crazy. Just, man, that's a big number of people that are now out in the wind. And you got to wonder, like with the churn and burn that's been happening in the industry over the last year in particular, it's how much of this awesome talent is just going to get burnt out and be lost forever. That's a really sad thing.
If you want a couple of other comparisons, I actually have numbers here because we're going to be playing a game later on. But basically, 800 people. If you're letting go of 800 people, Activision Blizzard have let go of another Bungie worth of people.
Yeah.
Is basically how many people they've let go of. Or they've let go of 8 Digital Extremes, the developers of Warframe.
Ah.
Wow.
You made it relatable.
Yeah, now I understand.
Yeah.
Now I feel empathy for those people.
In length, though.
How many Olympic-sized swimming pools?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll have to get my measuring tape out. What's the average length of a human being? How many can we stack up in a swimming pool?
How many liters of hopes and dreams can you fill that pool with that are now destroyed?
Wow.
That's the thing. Like most of these people were in their dream jobs already, and now that's just gone. It's tragic to hear about. Yeah.
What did we learn, Christian?
Never try.
Exactly.
One of my game developer friends over in the United States pointed out that after the Telltale Game Studios shut down, a whole bunch of people actually moved on to Activision Blizzard, and now they're genuinely concerned that all of those people have been let go of again.
Jesus,
it's just insane.
Yeah.
But yeah, moving on to more good news, and on the topic of Apex. Yeah, so Apex is now the fastest growing battle royale game of all time. Which doesn't say much because Fortnite really sucked when it first started up. But yeah, 25 million players.
Isn't it like a
week.
night and day launch comparison, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it is insane how many people have jumped on board. It would be really interesting if they could have stats on like how many of those people are, over from Fortnite, or are those just new conversions, like people that would not have otherwise gone and played a battle royale? Because I'm definitely one of those people. Like I was not interested in battle royales, and I'm now playing Apex. So
yeah.
They also announced a couple of things along with that. So basically, just did a little roundup of their first week. But they said that their season 1 kicks off in March. They've got some battle pass thing. There's going to be new legends, weapons, and loot over the course of the year. So they've got a roadmap for where they're taking things. And I have no doubt that EA has seen the success of this thing and said, hey, so we're going to increase your budget by like 300% to make this awesome and kick Fortnite's ass. I would not be surprised if that was happening inside them right now. But yeah, there's big plans for it. So
I like the season format. I'm a big fan of that. I think it's good.
Yeah. So I think it's worked really well for Destiny so far. So
absolutely.
Well, Matt, you mentioned just before that some former Telltale staff went over to Activision Blizzard. At least 4 of them have now founded their own studio called Ad Hoc Studio. That's 2 of the creative directors, 1 director of writing, and somebody who I'm not sure exactly what they did, but they formed Ad Hoc Studio, and they're going to be working on similar kinds of things to Telltale, but specifically that all they've said so far is that it's probably going to be live action, like FMV, kind of like the Bandersnatch Black Mirror episode, something like that. But no real details on what they've got in development. But that's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
it's really cool news, and I love their logo. Their logo is really cool.
It's a cool studio name too. I like that. Ad
Hoc. It's like the like the sprue logo, like the plastic sprue.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's cool.
Like it's kind of indicative of the sort of thing that they might be doing. Like in terms of narrative, that's a really neat idea and a really neat comparison to like narrative video game design. So yeah, there's a lot. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. It's a cool logo.
It is, yeah.
No, I like it. It reminds me of some miniature gaming ones that I've seen in the past as well, which I liked at the time too. So yeah, super cool design. Yeah, so speaking of super cool, like something I wanted to just insert briefly into the news tonight, because this is a fucking funny story. I'm a huge fan of this. So Beat Saber recently put out their new Expert Plus mode for all consoles, and I believe that it might have already been available on PC for some of the platforms there. But this is basically taking the hardest mode that existed in the game previously and adding another layer of absolute ridiculous bullshit on top of it. So I actually have Jam's brother on record saying that he has nearly had his arms drop off from spending about half an hour in this mode. And this is a super fit dude who works on a farm and, he's basically working out all day and then, comes back and does this and just can't handle it. So, yeah.
There's a particular mode that I enter where my arm almost falls off as well, and I spend about as much.
That's super hard in a different way.
Beat something else.
Yeah. So
Funnily enough, I call it Beat Saber as well.
Oh yeah, cool. You could do it competitively and beat off with someone. That'd be a great way to test. Anyway, so Beat Saber, as it turns out, broke Steam VR. So there's actual real world that's been collected from. Real-world data that's been collected from Beat Saber players, and that has resulted in Valve developers looking at what they thought was previously humanly possible and realizing that they missed the mark entirely. There have been some superhuman feats of speed when it comes to playing Beat Saber using the VR devices that Steam supports. So they've had to go back and rework some of those things. So there's a whole bunch of notes in the latest update to Steam VR, and one of the changes actually reads word for word, increase limits of what we thought was humanly possible for controller motion based on tracking data from Beat Saber experts. So that basically is, some people are just so good at that game that they just didn't think it was going to be even humanly possible, which I love. Yep. That's such a great story. So, yeah. Man, Beat Saber, what a great game. I'm going to play a lot more of that when it's winter and I'm not sweating my headset off my head.
Exactly, that's my thoughts exactly. Yeah, putting it on hold for summer.
Yep, sounds good. Cool. Well, something else that's been on hold, which is finally coming, Christian, is what?
That is Nintendo Direct, yay!
God friggin' time!
New Nintendo Direct announced. It will have happened by the time anyone is actually listening to this, because it's tomorrow for us. But all Nintendo have said is that it's going to have Fire Emblem Four Houses, which is the Nintendo Switch Fire Emblem game. And I think they said how long it's going to be. Let me just check. Like 35 minutes.
That's a decent length.
Which is a decent length, yeah. And it's been like 4 or 5 months, I think. Yeah, 5 months since we've had a Nintendo Direct. And there's been a few Nintendo things in the news, like the Metroid Prime 4 being restarted. And I guess people are they're looking for that pick-me-up. They're looking for that good news coming out of Nintendo. So I'm hopeful that there's going to be something beyond sort of standard expectations here. Maybe the other big game for 2019, other than like Pokemon and Animal Crossing. I'm hoping they'll have one more thing for us. Big thing.
Yeah.
Super Smash Battle Royale.
No. Please no.
Do you guys have any like hopes for the Direct?
I'd like an announcement of another sort of meaty RPG of some sort that maybe is unknown about in development. My hope against hope would be a new Breath of Fire, but I don't think that'll happen. So, yeah, that would be super cool.
Yeah.
Don't know.
I would be super interested. I don't see it happening, but seeing something Zelda related would be neat.
Yeah.
Like I'm showing the depth of my recent Nintendo knowledge here that that's the main thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think there are people that have said that, it'd be cool if they did like a Majora's Mask-esque thing with Breath of the Wild.
We've discussed that.
Yeah, it uses the same world and everything, but it's just like a smaller scale and it's just, like a more discrete story. That'd be cool.
Nintendo announcing that before the end of the year was, in fact, one of my predictions at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
That's right. It was, wasn't it? There's also been a bunch of rumors about a Nintendo Switch redesign, like a second version of the unit. So that'll be interesting to see if anything comes with that. There've been people talking about them making a more durable one with the Joy-Cons that don't detach, kind of aimed at kids, like they did with the 2DS. Yeah, so there's just been some rumors there, but rumors are rumors. So
here's an interesting little tidbit. It's a nice segue into last piece of news, but it's interesting that this is taking place technically on Valentine's Day. So given the last little news item, it'd be interesting if there was a crossover between that small Australian studio and Nintendo, since they were working pretty closely together.
So what is that last piece of news, Luke?
So Team Cherry have just announced that there is new DLC coming out for Hollow Knight, which is awesome because we all love Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight's a fucking cool game.
They said it was like a new adventure, didn't they? Have they used the term DLC?
Yeah, they have not said DLC.
Well, yeah, that's true. There could be some creative wordsmithing around that. But we do know that it's going to be focusing on one of the characters from the original game that was... Initially, it appeared as a boss character, and that's Hornet. So it was kind of like... This character's role builds out a bit as the game keeps going, and I don't want to spoil anything for people, but the character's armed with a sewing needle as the main weapon. It's kind of like a bit of a duelist, and she moves super fast, darts around, and basically...
She's Proto Man.
Yeah. Basically, that's a good way to describe it. So, but it's a super awesome character, and a lot of people like it, and it was a very, very popular part of the game. So, expanding it out into some extra content, I think sounds really good, and I'm looking forward to seeing what it is, and I'll play the shit out of it. So, yeah, I still got to finish that.
Sounds good to me.
Hollow Knight is one of my games on this that I want to actually play this year, and if they announce DLC or if it's another game, that just doubles my necessity to play it. So,
yeah.
The reason I honed in on whether they've called it DLC is because all of the DLC for Hollow Knight so far has just been more stuff added to the existing game, but you're still playing as the Hollow Knight. Whereas if it's something with Hornet, then it's the first time you'll be actually controlling a different character. So there'll be maybe something besides the charm system for upgrades, maybe a different map. So I'm hoping it's something more extensive.
Yeah, that's a good point. It could be using the existing map perhaps, but with a different character and different enemies.
A remix
and things.
thing.
Yeah. Could be cool. Cool. All right, well, main topic of the night time. Let's throw it over to Matt for a change. What's going on, man?
Yeah, so since we were doing our awards at the end of last year, we were discussing very briefly, do we want a category for best indie game or anything like that? And it kind of resulted in a really interesting discussion about, what the hell is an indie, what do we clarify here as being a indie game? And I think we ended out at the end basically just saying, well, fuck that discussion, let's call it small game instead. So I've had this kind of topic on the back burner because it's something that I've discussed with friends as well. Some very opinionated fellow game devs that have lent me their opinions and told me that my opinion is wrong, and I really respect them, but they're also wrong.
No, opinionated game devs, they're like bunyips, they don't exist. Yeah.
But yeah, so I wanted to discuss what is an indie. So indie as a term, it has a very, very vague definition, but when games first started having indie developers turning up, they kind of stole the term for music publishing. So if you were a indie game developer, it just basically meant that you didn't have a publisher that you were working with. But we've now had the industry around for such a long time that it's a question of, is it still applicable? We've seen a whole bunch of other terms rise out of it, like AAA indies, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But it's seen development and change among the games industry already. So I wanted to basically have a discussion with you guys, and later on we'll play a little game. And I say game with finger quotes, but we'll get to that. But when I say indie, what's the thing that comes to mind for you guys? What about you, Luke? What do you think? What comes to mind when I say indie?
Well, I mean, the first thing that I consider is whether we're talking about an indie game or an indie studio, because I think that there's almost like a different concept that kind of aligns to both of those. So I think it's possible to have a indie studio produce games that are not necessarily indie, because in that particular instance, they've had support that is out of the norm, essentially. So yeah, they might have a deal for a particular title, which includes like additional publisher funding or support or direction and that kind of thing. And they put a game out that is sort of, out of the ordinary for their typical stable and wouldn't be an indie game, but they themselves still operate as an indie studio, if that makes sense. And I guess theoretically you could have the same the other way around, but I think that'd be a lot less common to sort of have like a non-indie studio produce an indie game, because they typically don't get time to do that. But yeah, I don't know. It's tricky. I tend to think that the biggest thing that makes a studio indie is that they are unencumbered by corporate influence outside of their sort of core business. So they don't have a publisher that's forcing them to do things in a particular way and calling any of those shots. Funding is not really part of it, because businesses could get funding from almost anywhere, but sometimes with that funding comes like an undue level of influence that maybe would take away the indie nature of that business, depending on what nature that takes. So that's the kind of core thing I think of when it comes to indie.
Yeah. What about you, Christian?
I was just going to ask a question to Luke on what he was saying then. So if, say, an indie studio or a studio gets like a grant from a government body to create like an art product, and there's something in the clause of the grant which is this has to have an impact on the local community, this needs to meet these certain outcomes, is that enough? Is that as much influence in your mind to take them out of the indie scene?
I think it would be more about constant sort of presence of influence as opposed to just like a scope that they have to design around like that. So if it was regular sort of direction given from someone who is in an ongoing manner sort of changing the way that they go about designing the content, that's probably more so. I mean, what we're going to be talking about for everything to do with indies tonight, there's no black and white. Like, I think that there's going to be a huge amount of subjectivity to it, because no one has the authority to go out and say, this is the line drawn where this is where you're indie or you're not. So, and the level of influence will form a similar thing. Like, that's not black and white either. You could have, very simple guidelines that say you must design a game around these broad concepts, and that's a little bit of direction, versus people that are literally breathing down your neck and expecting reports on a daily basis. So, yeah.
I think generally the way I feel is probably, similar with fuzzy edges to how I predict, everyone here will feel, which is the kind of most important thing is the meaning that's being communicated. That's how I see it anyway, is indie and independent studio being, words of language. What's actually being understood by the person you're speaking to, and what's the meaning that's being imparted by that word, whether or not it's like technically fitting some prescribed definition, I think is less important than what's understood to be the meaning of that word. So if you say this is like an indie game, then there's an image that's conjured in someone's mind. It's not going to be a massive 3D open world game. It might be maybe pixel art or smaller scale. It might have more sort of human themes to it, something like that. Maybe the team working on it is a smaller team, and it may tick a couple of those boxes, but not all of those boxes. But it still captures the indiness that's associated with that word. And so I think that whether or not you tick the boxes is less important than the meaning that you're getting across with the word.
For sure.
That's how I think of it, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it as well. What about you, Adrian? I'm interested in your opinion here.
Why so?
Because I know that you're not super into the industry in the way that I am. And
yeah, that was basically going to be my angle anyway. And the reason that was going to be my angle is because it's absolutely true. So I think it's not a stretch to say that out of the people on the podcast, I'm probably in the least abreast of sort of industry knowledge in regards to video games.
God damn it.
So when it comes to indie, it's interesting because I might be a good representative for the everyman. When I hear the word indie, it's kind of similar to what Christian was just talking about, where I usually default to sort of regular nomenclature. So when I think of indie, I don't think of what an indie is. I think of what it isn't. So, for example, like Christian said, I don't think of a big open world. I don't think of a lot of money. Shamedly, I don't think of quality either. Like when I first hear the word indie, my mind doesn't go straight to quality game. It just goes straight to it might be a quick and cheap. Cheap is like when I think of indie, I think of a low price point. These are the kind of things as a consumer that come to mind when I think indie. And to be honest, I think the reason your mind defaults to that is because I don't have any more information than that. So, and maybe in my role as an interpreter, I am fascinated by language, and I often have this discussion with my wife because she's worked a lot with she's got a master's in literacy development, and we often discuss openly about people that complain about the use of language and the use of grammar. So and people that use the word, like a good example is when people say literally not instead of literally, but people say, "Oh, I literally died." And we are not the kind of couple that say, "Oh, we hate it when people say literally," because when people use that word, they use it with a set of rules, and there's like a paradigm to how it's used. So when people say literally, they don't actually mean literally, but they know that it doesn't mean literally. Like it's sort of that kind of unspoken rule, and that's the way language evolves.
It's like when someone says they're scared and they say, "I shat myself," kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it's this kind of idea that language is never wrong. And so in that sense, when it comes to indie, when I think of the word indie, I think of those things. But because it's such an amorphous sort of what's the word, like undefinable genre in my mind, I feel like the closest thing you're going to get to a definition is whatever it is to each individual. So if you're more well informed about the game industry, then like for instance, Matt, when you hear the word indie, what you picture in your mind is going to be very different to me. So I think that's the main point I'm really trying to make, and what I think of an indie, it's really kind of undefined. I can't really tell you honestly what an indie game is. It'd be interesting to know if there is a definition, but it's kind of like the very first episode that you and I did together, Matt, where I talked about roguelikes and sort of the definition of what a roguelike is. For me, indie falls into that category.
Yeah, AAA is similar too, because no one can define a AAA. It's very much the same sort of thing where the industry over time has kind of adopted this view that is not nailed down. It's just this kind of, again, it's an amorphous thing. That's a great way to describe it, where we kind of just know what it is without knowing specifically what it is, sort of thing.
I did like what you said, Luke, about splitting indie studio and indie game, and I do agree with that, where if someone says indie game, then I have that image in my head that I described, maybe it being like a smaller scale thing. But if someone says indie studio, then I do think that does mean, like you were saying, they are free from that. They don't have a publisher that's breathing down their necks. They are self-governed, and so I think that those two things are separate entities in language.
Definitely,
cool.
Yeah. And studios can transition in the way that they operate to go in and out of that as well. Like Bungie may be an example of that. Size-wise, they may not still be what we'd consider an indie studio, but the fact that they're now free of the influence of EA, that could change fundamentally the way they design games into more of an indie format. So, I don't know,
it's not a strict binary as well. You can have grey areas in between the two ends.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One other thing I just wanted to say, though, before we sort of get into more of the meat of the topic, is I very much think that in recent years, the term indie in particular, as opposed to saying independent, I think indie as a colloquialism has become a real badge of honor. And I think that people throw it around in the industry in a way to describe achievement at great sort of levels of adversity is kind of what I'm getting at. So they've really struggled against low budgets, low resources, huge amounts of creative talent against all odds to produce something that is, fantastic and creative and revolutionary. And that has kind of earned them the badge of indie, as opposed to some people, looking with scorn upon, say, some of your bigger studios that are pumping out AAA games that sure have had a huge amount of work put into them, but that they've got the resources, the money, the time, the everything to pump in and actually get there, as opposed to some of the people who have a lot less. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that the discussions that I've had with a lot of developers in past, I totally agree that that's a lot of the sentiment that they carry, is that indie is a badge of honor. Like with indie, it comes with this, you've struggled to develop, you've made self-sacrifice to create this thing.
Yeah.
And
you've paid the price.
You've paid the price, exactly. And usually, if you've made a AAA game, you've worked on a piece of entertainment. If you've made an indie game, you've made a piece of art. And that's the way a lot of those developers see that. I don't personally see it that way. I definitely see it more as I like to keep the definition simple. So when we're talking about independent game development studios, you have not got a publisher. If you're making an indie game, that game does not have a publisher. It's that simple, really. There are other interesting opinions that I've heard. So there was a really interesting point raised by one of the developers from that game company, where they were talking about the fact that for them, they considered indie as independence of thought rather than independence of finance. Because that's not necessarily a good thing, being independent of having somebody else's money to pay for your game, because that's important to have, right? Yeah, so I really like that discussion about language and what exactly the word means. And it kind of segues nicely into, do any of you think there is a difference in what the meaning of indie versus independent is? Because that's the thing that I think a lot of game developers will argue about. Like, if I say I'm an indie studio versus I'm an independent studio, is there a difference to you?
I think to me, independent does come. Oh, actually, I don't really think so. I don't think there's much of a difference to me.
Yeah,
I think indie is just like the cute nickname for an independent studio.
I think you're much more likely to see indie associated with studio and game, whereas I think that you would only usually say independent when it comes to studio. I don't think many people say it's an independent game. So just in terms of the language use. But I'm with Christian. Like, I actually don't think there's a lot of difference between the two. I think that, the badge of honor stuff, you could probably equate more to indie over independent just because of the way that it's casually sort of crept into the vernacular. But functionally, I think they both mean the same thing.
Yeah.
I was wanting to ask you something, Matt. You has it come up in your discussion with other devs at all, like situations where a production company will assist in maybe distributing a game in a different market to the domestic market? Because that happens. Sometimes you'll have a game that's self-published, self-distributed in one country, but then like Bandai Namco, might publish that game in Japan, and they'll pay for localization, they'll pay for distribution within Japan, but it was developed independently. Does that factor into the definition at all for you?
For me, no. Like, basically, you've gone and made that thing, you've made that game, you've had independence of thought while you've developed it, you've had independence of money if you've not had a publisher. Basically, everything you've done about that game is yours, and if they're going and translating it and such, then they own the translations, but they don't own your game. So it would still be an independent title. So I've actually genuinely not heard that discussion. Luke's very much right. There's this kind of back and forth among a lot of game developers. There are very hardcore game developers that believe that art is worth suffering for, and so that indie title becomes incredibly important to them because it is that badge of honor. Whereas when we're talking about a studio like Bungie, where they've now separated from Activision Blizzard and are operating on their own funds, are they indie? And this is where, so when I was talking about the indie versus independent thing, I like using the word independent with Bungie because, like you say, indie is cute. but Bungie is not a cute studio. They're a gigantic studio, right?
Yeah.
So Bungie being independent makes a lot of sense, but they still deserve to have that name, right? Like they are a AAA independent studio at this point. But you can still totally use indie for them. In fact, I would not be surprised, knowing what Bungie is like, having them talking very much in that indie voice whenever they're talking about things, because they can totally claim that now. You had mentioned, Luke, about access to funding and the size of the studio impacting on how we interpret it being indie. Like, do you think that that's very much the case? Like, especially with Bungie. Bungie's a good example.
Yeah, my personal view is probably going to be different to a few people when it comes to the funding. Like, I have a very strong feeling that the funding is irrelevant when it comes to determining if a studio is indie or not, because I think that at the end of the day, there are a lot of different sources potentially for funding, and I don't think it matters where the money comes from. What matters is what level of control comes with that funding. Like if they expect the studio to answer to someone in terms of the creative direction and the ongoing sort of management of the studio and the game kind of thing. Like, because you could have an angel investor that is a massive contributor to like a amount of money that puts them way above and beyond similar sized studios in terms of the headcount. If they manage to strike up a good deal with someone, I don't think that makes them any less indie. That just makes them extremely fucking lucky, and they get to, really do what they love with a bit less risk involved potentially. Well, maybe depending on the conditions of the deal. So, yeah, the money's an interesting. Like, I think another good example of that would be Armello. How League of Geeks actually managed to secure the state funding from the Film Institute of Victoria, if I recall correctly, and that would have bankrolled a lot of sort of getting Armello out to market. And, that would definitely put them way ahead of a lot of other similar-sized studios in Australia at the time. But it didn't make what they were producing or the way they were operating any less indie in my mind. So, yeah, I don't think that's...
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up too with my point about the, like, regional differences where, like, Matt, you said that, the game was made independent of thought. And that's kind of how I feel even with situations like if a publisher picks up a game at the end of the development cycle and decides to support it, put it on their store, maybe market it a bit, it still has been developed independently, even if at the very end, when you boot the game up, it does have a publisher splash screen, but it still was developed independently. So
I think digital extremes are another really good one to talk about in this scope as well. And because, we know Warframe reasonably well, this is a good one topically right now for us. So digital extremes at a time when they were first sort of, really struggling to get Warframe out there, they were absolutely fitting the definition of what we've just talked about as an indie studio. So they were very small in number. They were definitely up against it. They were, fighting against the face of adversity. They had some great ideas, very creative things, were pushing the boundaries. And yes, they did have some deals with individual other publishers on an ad hoc nature. But when they actually went out on their own and launched Warframe, I would argue that was pretty much the exact model of what we have been talking about indie being. Now, their level of success has made them able to grow to a point where they're just so big now that I think you probably wouldn't call them indie anymore. But really, the big difference is in terms of reach and headcount and success. Like, what they are doing at their core, I think you can still recognize the same passion there, the same sort of, slavish devotion to pushing the boundaries and taking risks and trying new things. The fact that they've been successful, it almost is kind of what's pulled them out of what you would consider indie. And that's maybe a good question to ask. Like, do we think that the level of indiness in a lot of people's eyes drops as soon as you're successful? Like, because that seems unfair, but I think it's kind of true in a way. So, yeah.
I think that there are good examples of that being maintained, though. Like, Undertale is a very good example. Like, that's massively successful, but it's still absolutely indie. Like, it's the indie
Japan,
aesthetic.
where it's published by 8-4.
There you go. Were you going to say, Adrian?
Well, by definition, it can't, like, once something is no longer indie, it has to be something else. So, I mean, I think indie has an inherent definition that includes the size and the profit and the growth of the game or the studio. So, I mean, if you're asking if an indie game grows, is it no longer an indie game anymore, then I'd say, of course, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, like, if that's part of your personal definition, I think that's absolutely the case. I think the difficulty here is where you start getting into those fuzzy territories where a lot of developers, I will count myself among them, like, if you've achieved your success and you've done so without having a publisher giving you millions of dollars, then you've achieved that success on your own, and you should still be able to call yourself independent. But then you have investment, and you don't really like. This is where it starts getting all fuzzy, right? Because when I was working with Stirfire had investors, but we still called ourselves an indie studio because everything that we were doing internally was a process that we were deciding on how to progress ourselves, right? Yeah. Like we had that independence of thought. But were we really independent? Like, because we had those investors, there were representatives for those investors on the board that had a say in how the studio would be run. They wouldn't get to decide specifically how certain things about the game we were building were getting done, but they would certainly be able to influence studio politics. And that's absolutely going to be a case for a lot of the games we're going to go through later on. And in fact, Digital Extremes is one of them. I was going through it because I'm like, I want to put something in there for Adrian to be able to relate to. And Digital Extremes is actually a really, really interesting case when it comes to are they indie or not. But I'll get into that later. So
Valve is too, right?
Yeah, this is where we start getting to fuzzy lines about, is Valve a publisher now?
Oh, if you guys want to talk about like levels of indie based on success too, let me throw one word at all of you. Fucking Minecraft. I mean, holy shit.
Yeah. But I mean, isn't that quite clear though? Minecraft were indie and then they were bought by Microsoft?
Yes. Yeah, but even before that happened, they'd reached such an astronomical level of success that would make us, almost all of us no longer consider them to be an indie studio or an indie game because they were way, way big. I mean, they had to get to that level to be bought out for what was it, $2.3 billion by Microsoft anyway? But when a company's getting bought out for that amount of money, like I don't know if you'd consider them indie anymore. That's a size that belies that.
Valve, still has they're not publicly listed. I don't think, are they? And like you said, Matt, are they a publisher? But I mean, all independent studios, they are their own publisher, right?
Yeah.
So Valve is its own. Yes, it is a publisher of its own games. So it still kind of is indie.
Yep, this is what I mean. Like the definition is super, super fuzzy, and some of the examples I've got are really fucking funny for that reason.
Yeah, I want to get into that.
But we are crossing over into AAA indie territory now, which is a thing that's been thrown around a lot, and I fucking hate the term personally. I think it's really dumb. But dumb. It is basically this idea of an independent that has achieved AAA indie status through success, which would be like your Minecraft. So you wouldn't say Minecraft was any longer indie. Minecraft was a AAA indie because they had lots of money. Because that's the major definition in all of these things when you're talking to game developers is typically, do they have a ton of money? If you're indie, you're probably working out of your garage. If you're AAA indie, you're probably living out of a fucking mansion and have lots of Minecraft money.
Yeah.
But
like what Adrian was saying before, I think is where this fits in. Like, if a game doesn't fit that mold of indie where it's not as good quality as some of the other fare out there, I think as soon as you pass that quality barrier where holy shit, this is really, really polished, you start to encroach into that AAA territory that people recognize. So
so maybe The Witcher 1 is an indie game. The Witcher 3 isn't an independent game, isn't an indie game.
Possibly.
A lot of the definition comes down to how much money did you spend to make that thing. And it's basically like you're a AAA indie if you've gone and sunk over a few $1 million into the development of a single title. Yeah. Because indies don't get to take those sorts of risks, right? Like there's nothing. Every single Stirfire game that I worked on, I can say without breaking any sort of NDA that none of them reached $1 million in budget. So like none of those things were a AAA indie game. They were always indie. The amount of investment that we got allowed us to operate and pay people for a couple of years to work on individual products. I think that there's a lot of fuzzy areas here, and I think that there's a real desire to label things, but nobody has any sort of measure. There's no measuring tape for whether or not you're an indie or an independent or a AAA indie or a AAA studio now, because whatever. Like it's a really bizarre thing.
Which humans just love labeling things, right?
Yeah,
like
they absolutely
people
do.
Say, "Oh, what's the definition of a Christian? What's the definition of a liberal? What's the definition of a like a poor person? Or like classes, everything." So yeah, we just love labeling stuff.
I think we're at a good point to go and jump into this little game of mine. So I call this game "Is This an Indie?" And you can imagine me motioning to a butterfly because I'm going to go with a me.
I love it.
So there's no points here. There's no point scoring or anything like that. I'm not tracking who's winning because the fact of the matter is that there's no right answer. It's
what's the fucking point then?
It's the walk. I was going to say it's the walking simulator of quizzes. Okay.
I hate walking.
So I've got a couple of games here that I've gone and done a little bit of research on, and basically for the scope of this discussion. So to start, let's start with a fairly pretty obvious one. Blizzard Entertainment. Is Blizzard Entertainment indie?
Fuck no.
Well, here's the thing. I don't know because I don't understand anything of what you guys are talking about. So, like, and I know you were using the word Blizzard and Activision, but I don't understand. I barely understand what a publisher is, so I don't know.
Do you need me to define that? I'm happy to define.
I think that's just the point I'm trying to make. Is that I don't know. That's my answer.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because if we're working off our existing knowledge, that's my existing knowledge.
I don't think they're independent because they're publicly traded.
They're publicly traded? Yep, that's a fair point. What about you, Luke?
Yeah, exactly the same reason. But, yeah, I mean, a lot of other reasons too, but that one's a pretty good one to stick with, so let's go with that.
They technically don't own themselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think publicly traded does add an extra level of fuzziness. Technically, they do have a publisher in that Activision Blizzard is an entity that Blizzard is a part of. And yeah, it's interesting. Here's a little factoid. So Blizzard Entertainment itself, without factoring in Activision, has over 4,700 employees until today. We don't know what that number is now, but 4,700 employees just inside of Blizzard. All right, let's start jumping into some more interesting ones. Supergiant Games. So they developed Bastion, Transistor, Pyre, and most recently Hades. Now, it's worth noting that one of their games had a publisher, and that was Bastion, which was published by Warner Brothers Interactive. But they claimed that during the development of that, they never had Warner Brothers actually go and tell them what they were doing. It was basically a deal where Warner Brothers gave them money to make sure the thing was getting developed because they liked the concept, and then stepped back and then handled the rest when publishing time came around. So in that one case, are they still indie? They've had Warner Brothers money. Are they indie?
Sounds indie to me.
Any indication of studio size at all?
20 people.
Yeah, I think that pretty much fits it. I would say indie.
And you look at the style of game too.
The style of game, absolutely. That's the other thing. Indie is absolutely aesthetic. There is an indie aesthetic. It's usually fairly cheap to develop, and it shows in the art. You're not going to get Destiny level graphics. And speaking of Destiny level graphics, you were going to say something, Luke?
I was just going to say, I think the size and length of the game experience is also a big factor there in terms of the.
That's true.
Yeah.
There are fairly long indie games that are just you've got a lot of roguelikes that are indies. So, and those.
I was going to mention art house film and how you wouldn't see state of the art CG in an art house film.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison.
Similar sort of thing.
All right, so next on our list, Bungie. So they developed Halo 1, 2, and 3, Destiny 1 and 2. They have over $100 million investment currently from NetEase, though, even though they've separated from Activision Blizzard. So are they indie? Silence.
No, I was just waiting for somebody else to talk first. But I'll say, yes, I think they are indie now. I think that investment doesn't preclude you from being indie, personally.
All right. So I think it entirely comes down to the nature of that investment, because I don't necessarily think that NetEase is entirely off the wheel when it comes to Control. Yeah.
Yeah. Without that information, it is hard to make a call.
Yeah.
From what I've read during all my research, that 100 million is actually for a mobile product that Bungie are developing. So it could very well be that they've slated some of that money to pay for Destiny stuff, and then the rest of it's going towards this other thing they're working on, which would mean that Destiny's an indie game. But, well, actually, no, is Destiny an indie game? Because even though it's separated from Activision, that was played with Activision money. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Destiny 1 and Destiny 2 are different games too, let's not forget. So
yeah. But like indie studios, in my mind, can be like guns for hire. They can get money for like a deal to publish. Like, we want you to make this game. That game's not really, an indie game, but it's been made by a studio that is independent outside of that investment.
Yeah.
So
that's fair.
Work for hire is a thing. Like, you can basically treat their
work
investments
for hire for NetEase for a mobile game, but they're still remaining in an independent studio, in my mind.
I think culturally and operationally, they probably aren't in the indie space again yet. But as more time passes and they change and evolve a little bit from separating from EA, then that will probably start to transition eventually.
Activision Blizzard.
Activision Blizzard rather. Yeah. I think that it's also a cultural thing. The way that they'll need to readjust to that new independence will take time. It won't just happen at the drop of a hat. So.
I have another one on the list. So I've got 10 on the list, so we're about halfway through. So League of Geeks, you had mentioned them very briefly, Luke.
Yeah.
So they developed Armello. They've had government money, which has come up on a couple of occasions. We've not discussed that yet. Does receiving government money mean that you're still independent?
Given that governments tend to know fuck all about game development and therefore don't get involved, I think that's fine.
I think that's a good sentiment to have. I would agree.
Yeah.
I think League of Geeks absolutely is independent. Until we get the news that they've been bought out by somebody else, I think that's absolutely the case, no matter how much government money they have. Okay, here's an interesting one. Hello Games, who developed No Man's Sky.
I knew you were going to use this one.
So this one's actually, to me, I think it's actually fairly cut and dry, but they do have a publisher, but only for advertising. They never received any money for development.
That's
Everything
Sony,
that they
right?
developed, it was Sony that basically paid for their advertising. Now, it's worth noting that advertising deal that Sony gave Hello Games is an advertising deal that Sony gives to everyone that develops games for them. Like, it's an offer that's there. If they like the game that you're developing, they will cover a portion of advertising by doing the advertising for you, basically. They won't give you any money to go out there and buy a marketing company or anything like that. They'll take over marketing on their platform. And that was basically the deal that Hello Games got. But their game has absolutely not got an indie aesthetic. It is insanely pretty. It's got a lot of work put into it, clearly.
I think they're indie.
Yeah.
Yeah? What about you, Luke?
My take on it is that they are, and I'm going back to when No Man's Sky first launched in particular, I think that they're an indie studio with a above average quality indie game that was marketed as a AAA product. That's my take on it.
I think they had a AAA appetite, but they, like, at launch, they were trying to be an indie studio producing a AAA product, but they didn't pull it off. Now it's turned around, but that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah,
I'm expecting Adrian's going to have more to say when we get to Digital Extremes and Warframe.
I got no idea. It's an indie, I think.
Yeah.
Because
That's fair enough.
It's a 50-50.
It's a Findy.
All right. It's a
Do I
Findy.
win?
Yeah.
Okay, that game company, they produced Flower and Journey, and technically they did have a publisher, Sony, but they claim that they're indie because they had freedom of thought.
That one trips me up.
Yeah, and their games are very indie in aesthetic.
Because I always thought of them as like those as like indie games made by like published by Sony. So like they've got that indie aesthetic, like you say, but I never thought of them as really actually indie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like the UbiArts games, like Child of Light. Like it looks like an indie, but it's not actually.
They've got a direct link to Santa Monica as well, don't they?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Because I know that their games have only appeared on the PlayStation Network and nowhere else, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Santa Monica Studio does come up, but that is a splash screen on those games.
Yeah.
Not sure what role that is.
Yeah. But Sony doesn't own that game company.
No. I think
No.
that game company, they've actually announced that their next title isn't PlayStation exclusive, I think.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm making that up.
I would still say indie. I think there's a couple of, oddities in the situation there, but I'd still say indie for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's worth noting their size, they're around 50 people. So they haven't broke the 100 mark, but 50 people is very large for an indie studio.
Mm.
I find it hard to settle my definition on that one.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Toughest one for me.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so Kojima Productions. Currently working on Death Stranding. interesting fact. So they've got around 100 people working for them. But the Kojima Productions brand is still owned by Konami.
Ah, fucking Kanema. Kajami. Fucking Kojima.
Kanema sounds like a bogan name.
Yeah.
Konima!
It totally does, yeah. Or a curse word.
Yeah.
Oh, man. That's such a ball of yarn. Who knows? I think is my answer.
Right?
Kojima Productions is still still owned by Konami?
The name is still owned by Konami, yeah. It's actually, they renewed the ownership on the name until like 2023.
Huh.
It's actually a fucking rabbit hole, it turns out. Like I ended up reading up a lot into this to try and get answers as to whether or not Kojima is actually independent. And the answer is nobody knows, because they could still be owned by Konami and just haven't said so.
I don't think anyone actually knows whether he's fucking human, so let's just start with that. I think the trajectory of the studio is actually not that dissimilar to Hello Games. The big difference being that the chief architect behind the whole thing and a number of the team that he's brought with him have got a very large established pedigree in the industry. So they're not unknowns coming into this fresh. They are someone that, some people that have a long-running history of quality and experience delivering some pretty big games. So that, by its nature, probably puts them above indie level. So I don't know. I would probably err on a no for that one. But
I'm going to err on a no. I can see how they are like similar to Hello Games, except Death Stranding, as far as I know, is being funded by Sony, whereas, as you mentioned, Matt, No Man's Sky was only like marketed by Sony.
Yeah.
So I think that they slide into the no category because the big game that they're working on is being funded by a major publisher.
It has to have so much money behind it as well. Like it's hard to imagine that studio being in the indie space, but like, if it comes out that they've done that and basically you just have investment, I could totally see investors basically being like, Kojima makes good stuff. Here's money. Do your thing.
Yeah.
So I could see them having freedom of thought. But yeah, it's a hard one. It's a really, really difficult one, Matt. Here's another one that's difficult to put a definition on. So Paradox Interactive. So technically they publish for other people. They also develop their own games in-house. They have a team of around 80 developers. They've worked on Stellaris, Hearts of Iron, Europa Universalis. They own other companies. So they recently bought Harebrained Schemes, which I was going to put as a separate one, but I'm going to tie this all together. They're also listed on NASDAQ. So they are a publicly traded company, but they're not huge by any definition.
Yeah, I think that's a no. I don't think they're indie. If they're publicly traded, that means they've got the influence of shareholders potentially. So, yeah, I would say no.
Yeah, it doesn't sound indie to me. And if they're buying up other studios too, that's a pretty publisher thing to do.
Yep. All right, now we get on to it's an interesting case. Yeah, I'm with you both that like they've basically entered publisher space at this point. It's hard to say you're an indie publisher unless you're publishing indie games or something. But I don't think they're an independent studio necessarily. Anyway, all right, last one. So Digital Extremes, they developed Warframe. They have a team of around 120 people. But here's the interesting tidbit I didn't bring up during our discussion. When I was reading into it, and I realized this is actually a really, really interesting example of whether or not they're an indie or not. They are owned by Leu, a holding company. So they're not actually a publisher. They're just a game developer holding company. But only 39% of the studio is owned by studio leadership. Most of it's held by the holding companies. That means they probably have members on the board with a controlling share of that company. Which makes it really bizarre given its success. It sounds like they have a lot of freedom. So
it to me, like that occupies like a between space for me where they're not an independent studio, but they have indie spirit.
Yeah.
Like, because you see that NoClip documentary and you hear the way they talk about the game and the decisions they made for their game and how it is their baby. And that has that like underdog tale indie feel to it. But they, from what Matt's saying about, they're not an independent studio. Yeah.
Weird. I would agree. I think regardless of where we land on their indiness or not, I just got to say, completely divorced from Warframe, what a fucking awesome studio they are. Like, I love everything I read about Digital Extremes. They seem like they've really got their shit switched on. So, yeah, I'm a huge fan of them based on what I've learned in recent history. So, yeah, I don't know. I think I'm with Christian. I think they probably have edged out of the indie realm at this point. But at one time, they were firmly entrenched within it and have transitioned over time gradually. So, yeah.
You started everybody on this Warframe path, Adrian. Have you got anything to say?
Only I'm listening to you guys, and I it's all basically going over my head, and I just without even it being a joke, I don't really understand a lot of the industry speak, but all I can think of is going back to when we were still defining what it means. When I think of indie, to be honest, I just think of like what the game looks like, and that's probably not very suitable for your guys' discussion. But having watched that, is it called No Clip? The channel that made that documentary about Digital Extremes. Yeah. Just the fact that I know that they made Unreal Tournament makes me go, they're not indie, because they had like a big successful game already. I think of indie, I think of people who are still making a game and getting up on their feet. For me, that's what I think of. So, like, anytime you've been mentioning games, this is my flowchart of thought. What does the game look like? Oh yeah, it looks like an indie game. Has this company made a big game before? Yes, not indie. No, indie. That's it. It's a three-step approach for me.
It's pretty elegant.
kind of comes down to the consumer discussion we were just having too, because previous pedigree of success, I think, should factor into it.
Yeah. I mean, look, part of me is like, again, not to talk about interpreting, but as an Auslan interpreter, it's my job to just distill complicated faff speak into the most simplest form. And so when I'm not disparaging the topic, but when I hear all the stuff about trying to define what an indie is, I just kind of try to simplify it down to like what a deaf person would understand if I interpreted it to them. In my mind, I just have to make it as simple as I can to process, and that's sort of where I end up.
Yeah, like what I said at the start of when Matt asked me about like the most important thing to me remains the meaning of the word as it's being understood by the other person. Indie game is a thing that people like kind of know what that means, indie game. And then whether you tick the boxes or not doesn't really matter when it comes to being an indie game. I still kind of lean back on that.
It's worth noting. Sorry, I was going to say really quickly with Digital Extremes, like most of their work is work for hire. Like they made that really shitty Star Trek game, but you can see that Warframe is their baby. It's the thing that they care about most. They've put a lot of love into that. So you can almost say that Warframe's indie in that respect, but Digital Extremes, the studio, probably is not.
Yeah, they did Unreal Tournament work for hire as well.
Yeah, I just think of Luke's use of the word zeitgeist, and I just think, like, in my mind, if you were to take, 200 people on the street and poll them and say, is this game indie or not, I think the results would just explain what is an indie game and what isn't. I think, like, the game studios trying to define themselves is like, someone mentioned about like defining, am I a Christian? Am I this? Am I whatever? Like, I feel like it's kind of like self-serving when really the term exists not for those working in the industry. I feel it exists for those consuming the product. And I think the majority of those people just define it based on the least amount of variables possible, because anything more is just too much effort.
That's a really good take. I like that. Yep.
In fact, my closing statements pretty much echo that. This is why I wanted your opinion, Adrian. I reckon, so this is my closing. I reckon that we do ourselves a disservice as an industry if we take too many qualifiers on what isn't indie. Like, the simplicity of do you have a publisher or a parent company is probably good enough, but there is also that indie aesthetic, which like small publishers like Devolver Digital totally thrive upon. And they will publish games and still call those games indie, even though they have a publisher and they've got publisher money, because they have just the indie aesthetic. Like, indie is a lot of things. It's not just, do you have a publisher or do you have money or do you have a certain art style or are you this big or have you spent this much in the development of your game? Like, in a lot of ways, you can just tick one of those boxes and then probably still say that you're indie or independent, like in the same way that Bungie probably can right now. We have situations like with Paradox Interactive and Harebrained Schemes, like the fact that they were allowed and still can define their own future is something that makes them fairly indie, even though they might be doing publishing or they might be, publicly traded. We just don't know how much influence is over them.
Yeah.
And this is why I wanted to kind of have this discussion as well, just because the old definition that we adopted from music publishing is absolutely outdated at this point.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way we can keep on just using that super simple definition for this, because there's so much fuzzy ground that I think that the moment you start treading into indie and you get a little bit of indie on you because you've stepped in that puddle, you probably should just be called indie at that stage. Like, it probably just shouldn't be a question. Or, whether or not you are, it should not be a thing for arguments on Reddit or 4chan or whatever.
If there is one thing I am super clear about, it is that one thing we do not need is fucking indie gatekeepers. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
Fuck yes.
So, if enough people sort of consider a studio or a work to be indie for, whatever reason. And I love Adrian's point about it being more down to the consumer than the business entity themselves, because you're entirely right. That's self-serving. It's the way that you promote and market your game. Like, if you're promoting it as an indie game, there's a reason why you're doing that, because you're trying to appeal to a certain audience. So the consumers will be a much more true test of what is and what isn't. I think that's a great point. Yeah. Cool.
Awesome.
And my only point.
Yeah, no, it's good. Fucking bring in the truth. I love it. It's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Great job, Matt. I love that topic. That was a good time chatting about that.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Nice.
I'm glad you had fun. Like, it was actually really interesting doing research for this and doing a little spreadsheet of just different studios and going into it with some pre-existing notion as to whether or not a studio was independent, and then coming out the other end of it going, wow, they're probably not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, it's time to put this little indie podcast to bed, I think. So thanks, everybody, for your contributions tonight. And thanks for listening. So if you want to touch base with us and maybe lend us your thoughts on what you think an indie studio or an indie game is or isn't, you can do so at all the usual spots. So, Matt, where can they get hold of us at the moment?
You can catch us by email at mail@partyloaded.com. You can Facebook us at partyloaded. Twitter is partyloaded show. And we have YouTube and Twitch as well.
That's it. Get a portal to everything in one hit at channelingame.com. That's kind of like the hub of everything that we do. So you check that out and look at a whole bunch of extra content and articles and cool stuff as well. So good way to go. So yeah, cool. All right, awesome. Plans for the week. I am going to be playing Metro Exodus this weekend. I'm super looking forward to it. Fucking awesome looking game, despite all the recent controversy, and I'm really down for that. So yeah, anyone else got anything interesting on the horizon besides more of the same? Not that there's anything wrong with that.
I have news not as a game per such, but I'm actually doing something really self-indulgent, and I'm dropping a day at work. So I'm going down to a 4-day roster. So what it means is I'm looking forward to having some more free time to actually play some more games.
That is
nice.
So I don't have to come on the podcast every week and say I've been playing Warframe and nothing else.
not that there's anything wrong with that, because holy shit, that
Yeah.
game still is awesome. So yeah.
Yeah, it's great, but I certainly, as I've sort of committed more and more to other, committees and work schedules and whatnot, over the last couple of years, my gaming time has severely decreased. So I'm really looking forward to having that day off and maybe trying out some new titles. And I feel, for me, playing a new game is a lot like starting to read a novel or starting a new TV series. I find it really hard to choose. But once I pick something, normally I usually enjoy almost most things I play. So I'm keen to just sort of have a look at the smorgasbord online and try some new stuff. But I feel like Jams is prompting me to maybe invest in Anthem as well, and I'm tempted to get access to it early for no other reason that it looks shiny and new, and I might give that a go. So that would be cool.
Yup. All right, there with you.
Just Odyssey for me. And I think Odyssey's going to last me until Sekiro comes out late March. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I will probably be doing Odyssey, but one of my friends also bought me The Isle, which is a game where you basically play as a dinosaur and you go from being like a baby dinosaur and you eat and grow into a larger dinosaur, and you're having to defend yourself from other dinosaurs that are other players that are running around and trying to eat you.
Dinorific.
Yeah, it sounds
To be
great.
clear, is this the third or fourth fucking dinosaur game that you are going to be able to talk to us about in the last
I
6
don't
months?
even understand why this is such a theme, but apparently it is. So I might end up playing that a little bit this week.
You're the dino guy.
That's it.
I'm the dino guy.
Not a terrible theme to have. I think it's fine. Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, that's some good stuff to look forward to. We'll be back next week to chat about more of that action. Until then, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
The Party Loaded podcast is a Channel Endgame production. For this and more great gaming content, bookmark channelendgame.com.